Imagine holding the belief that the human bedroom is literally the only place in the natural universe where a human being can force the creator to step out of eternity and create an immortal soul.
Right, which is an incredibly intense way to start, but yeah.
It really is. And I mean, that isn't a metaphor. It isn't, a plot from some science fiction novel.
Yeah, not at all.
Is the absolute core premise of this towering, highly controversial theological manifesto that we are going to tear into today for this deep dive.
And it is quite the manifesto.
Yeah, so the document is called What the Watchman Owes, a Layman's Formal Warning. It was authored by a man named Stephen Work, and it was published recently in July of 2026.
Exactly.
Now, for you listening right now, whether you're, I don't know, prepping for a deep philosophical debate or you're trying to understand the roots of traditionalist Catholic thought.
Or honestly, even if you are just insanely curious about how different minds construct reality.
Yes, exactly. This text is an absolute masterclass in systematic logic. But before we get into the actual gears of this thing, we really have to lay down some ground rules for how we are going to handle this material today.
We do, and this is a vital guardrail for our conversation. The source material we are exploring today contains some highly specific, politically and religiously charged viewpoints.
Very charged.
Right. It comes from a strict, traditionalist Catholic perspective. And we want to be exceptionally clear with you, the listener. We are not taking sides here.
Not at all.
Nor are we endorsing the viewpoints or the theology of this content. Our job today is strictly to act as your guides, impartially unpacking the architecture of these ideas so you can understand the author's arguments and how they are actually constructed.
Yeah, that is the perfect way to frame it.
We are looking at this like intellectual engineers examining a very complex, very old bridge.
Right. We're studying how the tension hold it together without telling you whether or not you should actually drive your car over it.
Exactly. We're just looking at the blueprints.
So, to start with those blueprints, the first thing you have to understand about this manifesto is this self-imposed rule the author set for himself before he even wrote a single word.
Right, the restricted tool set.
Yeah. He builds this massive argument using a very specific, severely restricted set of tools. He relies only on the pre-1958 Catholic magisterium.
Which is a very deliberate choice.
Right. Nothing past the death of Pope Pius XII is used to build the argument. He only uses the traditional Douay-Rheims translation of the Bible, the writings of the Church Fathers, and, the heavy lifting of St. Thomas Aquinas.
That was often called the angelic doctor in these circles.
Right, the angelic doctor. But I have to ask, why lock yourself into that specific time capsule? I mean, it seems like you'd be missing out on nearly 70 years of modern theological development.
Well, by locking himself into that pre-1958 intellectual ecosystem, the author is basically insulating his argument from modern theological trends.
Like the Vatican II stuff.
Exactly. Specifically, the reforms of the Second Vatican Council and everything that followed. He wants to ensure his argument can't just be dismissed as a reactionary modern political talking point.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, he is trying to speak exclusively from what he views as the timeless, unbroken tradition of the Church. He's essentially saying, I am going to prove my point using only the software that the Church operated on for centuries.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to guide us through this really intricate build, he provides what he calls a governing insight.
Yes, and this insight is the anchor for literally everything we are going to explore for the next hour.
The author states it explicitly right at the beginning, and I'll quote it here. He says, "The ordered conjugal act is the only natural human act to which God has attached the immediate creation of an immortal, rational soul."
It's a huge claim.
It is. I want you, the listener, to hold on to that sentence. The ordered conjugal act is the only natural human act to which God has attached the immediate creation of an immortal, rational soul.
Everything we are about to explore sprouts directly from that single seed.
But if we are really going to understand this text, we have to understand the geopolitical and, well, the institutional earthquake that caused the author to actually sit down and write this in July of 2026. Like, what was the crisis?
So the text begins with a foreword that lays out a very specific timeline.
Mm.
It tracks events within the Vatican from 2020 to 2026.
Okay.
And the author frames this sequence not as, a collection of random bureaucratic decisions. He sees it as a deliberate, symmetrical pattern of crisis that amounts to what he calls a formal scandal.
Let's walk through that timeline, because when you look at the public acts he cites, you can really see the institutional friction he's pointing at.
You definitely can.
It starts in 2020. The Vatican publishes its official yearbook, which is called the Annuario Pontificio.
Right.
And in this incredibly formal book, the title Vicar of Christ, which historically is like the paramount theological title of the Pope, is suddenly demoted.
Yes. It is physically moved down the page into a section called Historical Titles.
Right. It's sitting beneath the secular name of the Pope, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, and the text notes that Cardinal Gerhard Mueller called this move theological barbarism.
He did.
But I have to ask you, I mean, it's a yearbook, it's just a directory. Why is the formatting of a directory viewed as an ontological crisis of authority?
Well, to the modern secular mind, yeah, it is just formatting. But in the traditionalist framework, the papacy is not a secular political office.
Right.
It is a divine commission. The title Vicar of Christ asserts that the Pope is the living, breathing representative of Jesus Christ on earth.
Okay, so it's a big deal.
A huge deal. By relegating that title to a historical footnote, the author argues that the office's own instruments are speaking of his divine commission as a thing of the past.
Like it's just a museum piece.
Exactly. Rather than a present binding reality,
Uh-huh.
he sees it as an abdication of the very authority that gives the office its weight.
Okay, so that structural weakening sets the stage for the next phase in the timeline, which happens between 2023 and 2026.
Right, the Fiducia Supplicans document.
Yeah, we see the publication of this document authorizing pastoral blessings for same-sex couples. And this caused a massive global rift, didn't it?
It really did. The text points out that the entire episcopate of Africa refused to apply it.
Wow. And despite severe pushback, including unanswered formal questions from several cardinals, the pontiff reigning in 2026 in this text, referred to as Leo XIV, reaffirms the substance of those blessings.
And that brings us to the immediate trigger for this manifesto in July 2026. Two major events happen simultaneously that complete this symmetrical pattern the author is highlighting.
What's fascinating here is how he contrasts these two events.
Right, so first, a bishop named Christian Wirtz is appointed to the Diocese of Eichstätt in Germany.
And Eichstätt was historically known as a stronghold of traditional resistance, right? Against the highly progressive German synodal way.
Exactly. But Bishop Wirtz is documented in the text as an active supporter of liturgical blessings for same-sex couples, and he's a proponent of reassessing church doctrine on homosexuality.
So Rome intentionally replaces a traditionalist bishop with a progressive one in a key stronghold diocese.
Yep. And at the exact same time, the Vatican brings down the hammer on the traditionalists.
Right. The Society of St. Pius X, or SSPX, they proceed with episcopal consecrations despite the Vatican denying them permission.
And that results in the Vatican excommunicating them. Meanwhile, the traditional Latin Mass continues to be heavily suppressed worldwide under a decree called Traditionis Custodes.
So when you lay it all out like that, you really see the symmetry the author is focused on.
Very stark.
What the tradition has historically held as sacred, like the Latin Mass and traditionalist communities, is being restricted, suppressed, and punished.
Yeah.
And what the tradition has historically condemned is being blessed, promoted, and institutionalized by the church's own governing instruments.
And this is where the author identifies this as a public record of scandal in the formal Thomistic sense.
Let's pause on that word scandal. Because, in modern English, a scandal is a politician getting caught taking a bribe or like a celebrity affair. It's just gossip.
Sure.
But he's using it in a very technical theological way, isn't he?
He is. He is pulling directly from Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Theologica.
Right.
Specifically Part 2, Question 43, Article 1. Aquinas defines scandal as a word or deed, less rightly ordered, that occasions another's spiritual ruin.
So it's not about being offended.
Not at all. And the author isn't claiming to read the minds or judge the internal souls of the Pope or the bishops. He is looking strictly at the public acts.
Let me make sure I am grasping the exact angle he's taking here. It sounds a bit like, well, imagine you work for the Red Cross.
Okay, sure.
The foundational charter of the Red Cross is absolute neutrality in providing medical aid. But suddenly, the CEO starts sending out official company memos authorizing the staff to distribute weapons.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and aggressively firing any regional manager who tries to hand out bandages.
Right. They completely flips the mission.
Exactly. So the author is saying if you look at the company memos, the official acts of the office are directly contradicting the foundational charter.
And as an employee or a watchman, and he actually quotes the prophet Ezekiel about the deputy to warn the city, he is morally obligated to sound the alarm.
regardless of what the CEO was actually feeling in his heart.
Exactly. An analogy holds up well, but we do have to push it further into the theological realm. In a corporation, you can appeal to the board of directors.
Right. What's the equivalent in the church?
Well, the classic mechanism for correcting this sort of doctrinal confusion is the formal dubia.
Dubia, like doubts.
Yes. It's where cardinals submit precise yes or no questions to the Pope asking for doctrinal clarification.
Oh, okay.
But the author notes that this mechanism has been short-circuited, the questions are being ignored, therefore the Watchman has to blow the horn.
Wow.
And the alarm he is sounding isn't just about internal church politics, it's about a fundamental desecration of reality itself.
Okay, so if the public actions of the church are contradicting its foundational charter, what exactly is the sacred truth the author thinks is being violated?
He claims there is a specific metaphysical reality under attack.
Which brings us back to that governing insight. We are moving from church politics, from Vatican bureaucracy, into pure metaphysics.
We're looking at the actual mechanics of how a human soul is made.
This is so wild.
It is. The author anchors his argument in Pope Pius X's 1950 encyclical, which is called Humani Generis.
Okay.
That encyclical explicitly states that the Catholic faith obliges us to hold that souls are immediately created by God, ex nihilo, out of nothing.
I really need you to explain this like I'm 5, because if you're listening to this right now, especially from a modern secular background, your alarm bells are probably ringing.
Oh, I'm sure they are.
The modern mind naturally asks, why can't the soul just evolve from biology? Why can't it just be a byproduct of the parents' genetic material coming together?
Right.
Why does God have to individually intervene and create a new soul from scratch at every single conception?
It is the core metaphysical barrier between the materialist worldview and the Thomistic worldview. The author unpacks Aquinas' reasoning here.
Okay, lay it on me.
According to this philosophy, the rational human soul possesses operations that are entirely independent of physical matter, specifically the intellect and the will.
Wait, independent of matter?
Yes, your ability to comprehend abstract, universal concepts like justice or mathematics or eternity, these are immaterial operations.
Oh, I see. Because you can't put justice in a test tube. It doesn't have a physical weight or a chemical composition.
Exactly. And in Thomistic philosophy, there is an ironclad rule of causality. An effect cannot be greater than its cause. The lower cannot produce the higher.
So matter can't produce spirit.
Precisely. If the soul has immaterial operations, it cannot be produced by a change in mere physical matter. You cannot deduce a spiritual, immortal soul out of the physical potentiality of a sperm and an egg.
Okay.
If you believe the soul came strictly from the biological parents, you would be falling into a heresy called traducianism.
Wait, really? Traducianism? That's a massive word.
Yeah.
Are you saying that in the past, people actually thought the soul was essentially passed down through genetics?
Okay, they did.
Like eye color or height? And Aquinas had to formally step in and say no?
Yes, traducianism was a real theological theory. It was often associated with early thinkers trying to explain how original sin was transmitted.
Because if the sin is inherited, the soul must be inherited.
That was their logic, yes.
Yeah.
But the church definitively condemned it because it reduces the spiritual soul to a material byproduct.
Got it.
Because the soul is immaterial, it cannot evolve, and it cannot be biologically inherited. It requires a direct, immediate act of creation by God himself out of nothing every single time a human being is conceived.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because God is doing the heavy lifting of creating the soul, but the author connects this direct divine act to the physical act of the parents.
He does.
He uses a very specific word to describe what the husband and wife are doing. He calls a conjugal act theurgic.
Yes, theurgic.
Now, I looked this up, and theurgy originally comes from pagan Neoplatonists, and it basically meant performing a ritual to compel a god to do something, like literal magic.
It did mean that, but the author is incredibly careful to fence this term off from its pagan roots. He explicitly states that man does not and cannot compel God.
Okay, so it's not a magic spell.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
You aren't casting a spell to force the Creator's hand. Instead, he glosses the word theurgic to mean a divinely cooperative act.
Divinely cooperative.
Yes. In the received language of the tradition, the spouses are cooperators, de cooperators with God, The parents are the secondary causes of the physical body. They provide the biological material.
But regarding the soul,
Regarding the soul, they are merely providing what he calls the dispositive occasion.
I really have to push back on this because the author uses the word summons. He explicitly says the spouses summon the creator.
He does use that word.
That sounds an awful lot like humans are giving orders to God. Hey, we did the biology down here. Hurry up and bring the soul. How does he reconcile this idea of humans summoning God without reducing the Almighty to a giant vending machine that just dispenses souls when we push a button?
It is a vital distinction, and he defends it by diving deep into the metaphysics of instrumental causality and the difference between God's absolute power and God's ordained power.
Okay, break those down for me.
This is crucial. God has potentia absoluta. What God, in his absolute omnipotence, could theoretically do. He could just pop human beings into existence out of thin air if he wanted to.
Right, he's God.
But God also has potentia ordinata, the specific rational order he has freely chosen to establish in the universe.
So God established a system, and he voluntarily binds himself to operate within that system.
Exactly. And within that ordained system, he appointed the human conjugal act as the specific instrument for human propagation.
Okay.
The author uses a classic Thomistic analogy to explain how this doesn't diminish God's sovereignty, the carpenter and the saw.
Oh, I like this analogy.
A saw cuts through wood because of its sharp teeth. That's its own natural form. But a saw only builds a bench because it is being moved by the art of the carpenter. The saw is the instrumental cause. The carpenter is the principal cause.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this carpenter and saw analogy. Is the author saying the spouses are just mindless tools? Because that strips away a lot of human agency. A saw doesn't choose to cut wood.
He anticipates that objection entirely. With respect to the physical body, the spouses are true, honorable secondary causes. They have free will. They choose to engage in the act.
Right.
But with respect to the soul, they are not causes at all, not even instrumental ones. Because creation ex nihilo admits no instruments.
Oh, right. You can't use a tool to create something out of nothing.
Precisely. So their act is the dispositive occasion. They create the exact physical and moral condition upon which God has freely promised to act.
Oh, wow.
When the author says they summon God, he means it by an analogy of a proportion. God isn't being forced or moved by the humans. Rather, God is displaying his unchangeable, immutable fidelity to his own freely established order.
He promised to attach his creative act to this specific human act, and God does not break his promises.
That's it exactly.
It's less like summoning a servant and more like stepping into a stream of water that is already flowing by God's design. You didn't make the water flow, and you aren't forcing it to flow, but by stepping into the riverbed, you are engaging the force God put there.
That's a beautiful way to put it. The invocation is human, but the response is God's sovereign fidelity to himself.
Okay, but if human beings actually have the ability to occasion a direct, immediate divine response, if we can act as the dispositive occasion for God to do something only God can do, where else does this happen in Catholic theology?
It's a great question.
Because this seems like an incredibly heavy power to just leave lying around in the biological world.
And this is where the author introduces what he calls a novel synthesis.
Hmm.
It is structurally fascinating.
Yeah, he takes the conjugal act and sets it right on the altar next to the highest sacraments of the Church.
This is perhaps the most structurally audacious part of the entire manifesto. He is taking biology and elevating it to the level of liturgy.
He lines up 4 paradigm cases of these divinely cooperative acts, right?
Yes, 4 cases. First, the consecration of the Eucharist. At the Council of Trent, it was defined that when the ordained priest says the words of institution over the bread and wine, the entire substance is converted into the body and blood of Christ.
Okay, that's...
Second, sacramental absolution. When the priest says, I absolve you, it is a judicial act that literally restores the dead soul to grace.
But both of those require an ordained priest. You have to have holy orders to perform them.
True, but the third case does not. The third case is emergency baptism.
Right.
Thomas Aquinas teaches that because baptism is so absolutely necessary for salvation, God ordained that in an emergency, anyone, even a non-believer, an atheist, a pagan, can validly baptize someone.
Wait, an atheist can perform a valid Catholic baptism?
Yes, provided they use water and the correct Trinitarian formula with the intention of doing what the Church does. The divine act occasioned here is the total regeneration of the soul and the remission of sin.
And then the fourth case is the ordered conjugal act.
Yes. Look at the shared architectural blueprint of all 4 of these acts.
Let's break that down.
In all 4, you have a human act that is properly performed according to its ordained structure. In all four, that human act occasions a direct divine act that no created power in the universe could produce on its own.
And the result?
And in all four, the result is the creation of a wholly new reality. The real presence in the Eucharist, the restored soul in confession, the regenerated soul in baptism, and the newly created immortal soul in the conjugal act.
Okay, but what happens when the formula is broken? I mean, in a chemistry lab, if you mix the wrong chemicals, you might just get a weak reaction, or it just fizzles out.
Right.
What is the rule when you are dealing with these theurgic acts?
The author lays down a very strict rule based on sacramental theology. A defect in these acts does not yield a lesser effect.
It doesn't just work a little bit.
No. It yields absolute nullity or it yields sacrilege.
Nullity or sacrilege.
Right. If a layperson stands at an altar, wears the vestments, and says the exact words of consecration over bread, absolutely nothing happens. The form was performed, but the condition for the divine response, the priesthood, was absent. The act is null. It's empty.
How does he apply that strict standard of nullity and sacrilege to the conjugal act?
If the sexual act is structurally closed to life, by contraception, by being a same-sex act, by being a solitary act, the sacred form of the act is physically performed by the body.
Right.
But the divine response is not occasioned because the required condition, the structural openness to the transmission of life, has been refused by the very nature of the act. The mechanism has been deliberately jammed.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this places the conjugal act at the absolute apex of the natural order. It runs perfectly parallel to the Eucharist in the sacramental order.
It does.
And if you're a modern listener, this is an incredibly alien concept. Modern culture views human sexuality as a biological urge, a playground for consensual pleasure, or maybe just a way to bond emotionally.
Yeah, that's the standard modern view.
But the author is saying that human sexuality is the literal threshold where eternal spirits are spoken into existence by the Creator. To mess with the mechanics of that threshold isn't just breaking a prudish rule about chastity.
No, it is akin to walking up to the altar and messing with the Eucharist.
Yeah.
He is moving sexual morality out of the category of breaking a rule and into the category of profaning the sacred.
That is heavy.
And to fully cement this sacred character, he doesn't just look at the mechanics of the act. He traces the result of this union all the way back to the very beginning of human history. He goes straight to the Garden of Eden to find the prototype.
Right, because we understand how the act works structurally now, the human saw and the divine carpenter. Now we look at what happens when the union is actually complete. The author starts by analyzing the famous quote from Genesis. "Therefore a man shall leave father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall be two in one flesh."
The classic one-flesh union.
Now, when I was reading this part of the text, I immediately spotted what I thought was a flaw in his argument.
Oh.
Yeah. I was thinking, wait a minute. Two in one flesh was spoken by Adam. It wasn't spoken by God. Why build this massive, towering theology of marriage on a quote from a human being? Couldn't Adam have just been being poetic or romantic?
It is the natural objection to make, but the author anticipates it and pulls out Thomas Aquinas again. He uses Aquinas to explain the epistemic authority of Adam.
The epistemic authority.
Yes. According to Aquinas, before the fall, Adam possessed what is called infused knowledge.
Okay, I'm going to need you to explain infused knowledge for me.
Sure. Think about how we learn things normally. We learn by trial and error, by gathering data through our senses, and slowly building abstract concepts over time.
Right. We go to school, we read books.
Exactly. Aquinas argued that Adam didn't have to do that. God infused the knowledge of the natures of things directly into Adam's intellect.
Oh, wow.
His unfallen mind actually participated in the divine ideas. He saw the inner truth of things the way God saw them.
So it wasn't just guessing.
No, so when God brings the animals to Adam to see what he will name them, Adam isn't just making up random sounds. The names he gives designate their actual objective natures.
So when God builds the woman from Adam's rib and brings her to him,
Adam names her Isha, which is drawn directly from the Hebrew word for man, ish. In doing so, Adam is infallibly perceiving the ontological continuity between them.
so he isn't inventing a romantic metaphor.
Not at all. He is recognizing an objective metaphysical truth. It was a moment of perfectly illuminated human freedom, and it was immediately sealed by God's ordinance.
That double structure is fascinating.
The author points out that this event in Eden is the prototype. A divine act God building the woman meets a human consent Adam, recognizing and naming her. That double structure is the exact prototype for every single divinely cooperative act that follows. God provides the grace, Man provides the form and the consent.
But the author doesn't stop with Adam and Eve. He zooms in on the one-flesh union itself and applies what is called the doctrine of appropriation.
Yep.
And this basically maps the abstract theology of the Trinity onto the physical family unit. How does this doctrine of appropriation actually work?
This is a beautiful piece of speculative theology that the author builds right from the tradition. The doctrine of appropriation states that while all of God's actions in the world are done by the whole Trinity acting together as one, we can fittingly appropriate or assign certain attributes to specific persons of the Trinity.
To help our finite minds understand them.
Exactly. For example, power is appropriated to the Father. Wisdom and order are appropriated to the Son. Goodness, love, and life are appropriated to the Holy Ghost.
Okay, I get mapping power to the Father and wisdom to the Son. But how does he map that onto the husband, wife, and child? Mapping a human baby to the Holy Ghost feels like a massive theological leap.
It does sound like a leap.
How does he logically get there without it just being a poetic metaphor?
He maps it based on the relational origin of the persons. The husband represents the juridical initiating principle, which is appropriated to the Father.
Okay.
The wife represents the principle of embodiment and ordered wisdom, the help like unto himself, which is appropriated to the Son, who is the perfect image of the Father.
Right. And the Holy Ghost.
In Trinitarian theology, the Holy Ghost proceeds from the mutual love of the Father and the Son. Therefore, the offspring, the child, is the principle of life proceeding from the mutual embodied love of the husband and wife.
Oh, wow.
The child is the physical manifestation of their mutual love. The author calls this the vestigium trinitatis, the actual physical trace of the Trinity left in creation.
He brings in St. John Chrysostom here, who has an amazing perspective on this. Chrysostom says the child is a sort of bridge so that the three become one flesh.
Yes, the child bridges them.
The one-flesh union isn't just a duo. In its complete, structurally ordered form, it's a triad.
And here is the devastating logical consequence the author draws from this mapping. If the complete family unit is a created image of the Holy Trinity, then what happens when you intentionally perform the conjugal act, but structurally alter it to guarantee it remains sterile?
Oh, I see where this is going.
You aren't just omitting a biological outcome, you are actively striking the third term from the image. You are performing a ritual that deliberately erases the term representing the Holy Ghost. You are defacing the vestigium trinitatis.
Wow. If you take all this groundwork, the metaphysics of God creating the soul, the conjugal acts sitting parallel to the Eucharist, the one-flesh union acting as an image of the Trinity, it all builds to the absolute climax of the document.
It does.
The author takes everything we've discussed and uses it to forge a radical, terrifying new argument regarding the Ten Commandments, specifically the second commandment.
Yes. This is where the Watchman sounds the loudest blast on his horn.
Let's set it up. The second commandment is, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain."
Right.
Now, growing up, I was taught this meant you don't say, "Oh my God," when you stub your toe. It meant don't use profanity or swear falsely.
That's the common understanding.
But the author goes back to the original Hebrew to expand this. The word for in vain is shev, which means empty, hollow, or without substance. To take the name in vain means to invoke the divine power or presence emptily.
To make this argument work, the author has to establish what he calls a bridge premise. He has to prove that the human body and the generative act actually have something to do with the name of God.
Right, because otherwise they're totally disconnected. How do we know God's name in nature?
He turns to the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 1 and to Psalm 8.
Huh.
Paul writes that the invisible things of God, specifically his eternal power and divinity, are clearly seen and understood by the things that are made.
And the psalm.
And the psalmist says, "O Lord, our Lord, how admirable is thy name in the whole earth."
So creation itself, the physical universe, is the manifestation of God's name.
God's name isn't just a collection of syllables. His name is his revealed order, his power, his authority. And as we established earlier, the absolute highest manifestation of God's creative power in the natural order is the generative act, where he immediately creates an immortal soul.
So what does this all mean? If the generative order is the highest manifestation of God's name in nature, we arrive at the author's ultimate syllogism.
Right.
He argues that if you invoke that sacred name-bearing form, if you perform the conjugal act, but you deliberately exclude the substance, which is the openness to life, you are bearing the exact same structure as taking God's name in vain.
Yes, you're using the sacred form emptily.
You are using the machinery of creation for your own pleasure while locking the Creator out of the room. Contraception isn't just a biological workaround. Structurally, it is blasphemy in the flesh.
It is a profound synthesis. And to explain how this works in practice, he creates a map of the gradation of disorder, going back to his sacramental analogies. He breaks down two categories of disorder.
The first is what he calls structurally sterile acts. This includes sodomy, masturbation, and contraception. In these acts, the condition for the divine response, the openness to life, is violently excluded by the very form of the act itself.
This is the analog to an invalid consecration. It's like a layperson saying the words over the bread. The form is there, but the condition is absent.
And the second category.
The second category is contextually disordered acts. This would be fornication or adultery between a fertile man and woman. The biology is intact. Conception can occur.
So it's not structurally closed.
Right. Therefore, it is the analog to a valid but sacrilegious consecration, like a priest who consecrates the host, but does it for a satanic black mass. God may still answer the summons, a child may be conceived, a soul is created, but the context in which the invocation was made entirely desecrates the order God established.
This raises an important question. If someone is engaging in these acts and they don't realize the metaphysical weight of what they are doing, which applies to almost everyone in the modern world, where does this disorder actually lead them? Does it just stay in the body?
According to the text, and drawing heavily on the church fathers, no, it absolutely does not stay in the body. The author notes that this deep structural desecration has a psychological terminus.
A psychological terminus.
He quotes Pope Gregory the Great, who outlined what he called the daughters of lust. Gregory said that from lust comes blindness of mind, inconsiderateness, inconstancy, and eventually, odium Dei, the hatred of God.
Hatred of God. That is a terrifying escalation. Are you saying that anyone who uses contraception or engages in structurally sterile acts is secretly hating God?
It is the most sobering claim in the tradition. Thomas Aquinas systematized this, explaining that venereal pleasure, when disordered, corrupts the acts of reason.
It ascends into the intellect.
Yes, what the author is arguing is that habitual sexual disorder ascends into the intellect. The soul that repeatedly, habitually refuses to honor the sacred character of the act through which God's creative power is engaged will eventually find the Creator himself intolerable.
Wow.
The soul will recognize on some deep, unarticulated level that its bodily actions are at war with the author of nature, and rather than change the actions, the soul will learn to hate the author.
He points out that the Apostle Paul traced the exact same arc in Romans 1. Paul starts with the suppression of the truth of God in creation, moves down into bodily disorder and idolatry, and ends his list of vices by describing men who are hateful to God.
Right. It's a complete psychological and spiritual collapse triggered by the desecration of the generative order.
And this brings us all the way back to the beginning. This is precisely why the author views the crisis in the Vatican, the blessing of same-sex unions, the appointment of progressive bishops, as a formal catastrophic scandal.
Exactly. If the church's own instruments are teaching people to normalize structurally sterile acts, the church is effectively teaching souls to take God's name in vain with their bodies, paving a superhighway to odium Dei.
Now, the author knows perfectly well that this towering architecture is going to be attacked by modern theologians. He knows this is a highly controversial, rigid stance that flies in the face of the last 60 years of secular and even mainstream religious thought.
Oh, absolutely.
So in the appendices of his manifesto, he systematically counters modern revisionist arguments.
Right.
We really have to address these to understand the full armor of the text.
He anticipates the pushback and provides a preemptive defense, mostly dealing with how modern people view biology and psychology.
Let's start with the first objection, which is the charge of biologism.
Right, the biologism objection.
The modern critic looks at this and says, doesn't this just reduce human love to biology? You are equating the mere presence of sperm and egg with moral goodness. What about sterile couples? What about couples who are too old to have children?
It's a very common pushback.
If structural openness to life is required, aren't you condemning them too?
The author dismantles this using the Thomistic defense of natural inclinations. He argues that natural inclinations, like the inclination toward procreation, aren't just blind biological mechanisms. They are normative because human reason recognizes them as intelligible goods.
And for the sterile couple?
For the sterile couple, the tradition makes a vital distinction based on the structure of the act, not the statistical probability of its biological outcome.
Because if an infertile husband and wife perform the conjugal act, they aren't using a contraceptive barrier. They aren't altering the mechanics of the invocation.
Precisely. Their act is still structurally generative. It retains the complete architecture of the invocation. They perform the act whose nature is generative, and they leave the answer to God.
Even if they know the answer is likely no.
Right. If biology fails per accidens, by accident of age or defect, that is fundamentally different from the agent actively, deliberately canceling the invocation by changing the form of the act itself. The moral measure is the structure of the deed, not the statistics of the biology.
Okay, then he tackles the big one, the orientation objection, or the I sought fallacy.
Yes.
If you are a modern listener, this is really the crux of the cultural debate. The modern argument is, people are born with same-sex attractions. It is an unchosen orientation. Therefore, acts expressing that stable, unchosen inclination must be natural for them and cannot be condemned as disordered.
Right, that is the prevailing secular view.
How does a traditionalist operating strictly on pre-1958 software handle the modern concept of sexual orientation?
He handles it by pointing out that the tradition has dealt with this concept for centuries under a different name, the wound of original sin. He relies on Aquinas' treatment of disordered concupiscence. The argument is that because of the fall, human nature is wounded. Therefore, a disordered inclination can feel entirely natural, entirely connatural to a person. It can be a deeply experienced, unchosen givenness.
But the feeling of naturalness doesn't make the resulting action morally ordered. Just because something is a feeling doesn't mean you want to act on it.
Precisely. The is of an experienced feeling does not dictate the ought of moral action. The moral measure is not the voluntariness of the inclination. The measure is the object and structure of the act itself.
Okay, so what is the pastoral response according to the text?
The author notes that the pastoral response to an inculpable, unchosen inclination is compassion in the mode of truth, meaning the call to chastity assisted by grace, not the reclassification of the act as morally good.
And that leads to his final warning against the revisionists, specifically those within the church who want to soften the doctrine. He warns against the danger of erasing the category of intrinsic evil.
This is a massive point for him.
There is a movement to redefine intrinsic evil away from specific bodily acts and turn it into a vague concept like a violation of fundamental human dignity. So as long as two people love each other and respect each other's dignity, the specific mechanics of what they do with their bodies doesn't matter.
If we connect this back to everything we've discussed, you can see why he views this redefinition as fatal. If you dissolve the moral architecture of an act into just intention and context, if you say the body doesn't matter, only the love matters, you destroy the very locus of the sacred summons.
It completely undoes the whole system.
Yes. You are telling the carpenter that the shape of the saw doesn't matter as long as the saw means well. But a hammer cannot cut wood no matter how much it loves the carpenter.
You erase the threshold where the soul is created. You turn the body into just a meat suit that the mind pilots around rather than the temple where God's creative power is invoked.
And that is why, for the author of this text, the culture wars over sexuality and marriage are not about moral hygiene. They are not about keeping society prudish or polite.
They are a battle over right worship.
Yes, right worship. For the author, acknowledging the sacred, divinely cooperative nature of the conjugal act is an act of acknowledging that God is Lord, that his ordering is sovereign, and that his name is holy. To profane that act is to profane the name.
It is an immense framework. We have covered Vatican politics, the creation of the soul out of nothing, the sacramental architecture of the bedroom, the traces of the Trinity, and the psychological collapse into the hatred of God.
It's a lot to take in.
Whether you agree with stevenwork's theology or you find it entirely archaic and restrictive, you have to admit that this document offers a meticulously constructed, towering architecture of thought. It asks you to view the human body not as a biological machine to be optimized or played with, but as the literal threshold where eternal souls are spoken into existence.
It really shifts the entire paradigm.
But as we wrap up, I want to leave you, listener, with a final provocative thought. Something to chew on that builds on this text but looks beyond the argument stevenwork made for 2026.
Let's hear it.
If we accept this traditionalist framework, if we accept that the human genitive order, the physical union of man and woman, is the highest natural manifestation of God's power and the singular doorway for the immortal soul to enter the world, what happens when humanity attempts to completely bypass the human body?
Oh, that is a chilling thought.
Think about where we are heading. Think about the rapidly advancing fields of biotechnology, artificial wombs, cloning, and genetic engineering.
Right?
If the ordered conjugal act is the appointed sacred instrument to summon the creator to create a soul, does shifting the genesis of human life out of the marital bed and into a sterile glass laboratory fundamentally alter or sever that divine cooperation?
Are we attempting to take the carpenter's tools and build the bench without him?
Exactly. And if we do, what exactly is the nature of the life that gets built?
It's a question we might actually have to answer in our lifetimes.
We just might. I want to thank you so much for joining us on this immense deep dive. It's not easy material, but understanding the deep architecture of these ideas is how we make sense of the forces shaping our world. Keep asking the hard questions, keep looking beneath the surface, and keep exploring. Until next time.